Leader, the meeting's now live.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Cabinet of Portsmouth City Council. I'm sorry we're running slightly late. Slight technical issues, but welcome, everybody. Can we just run through introductions so that people know who everybody is? At the top of my screen, I have Hugh Mason. Do you want to say, Hugh, what you do and why you're here? And not on mute.
Sorry, slight difficulty here to unmute. I'm Hugh Mason. I'm the Cabinet Member for Planning and City Regeneration, and I am also the City Councillor for St Jude Ward.
Matthew.
Hi, Matthew Willington, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Social Care.
Okay. Dave Ashmore.
Dave Ashmore, Councillor for Fratton and also Cabinet Member for Environment and Climate Change.
Lynn.
Lynn Stagg, Ward Councillor for Baffins Ward and Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation.
Okay. Susie.
Susie Horton, Cabinet Member for Children, Families and Education.
Okay. Other people I've got here, Chris Ward.
Chris Ward, Director of Finance.
Ian Maguire.
Ian Maguire, Assistant Director for Planning and Economic Growth.
Julian Pike.
Yes, Julian Pike, Deputy Director of Finance.
Stephen Ho.
That's Stephen Ho, Principal Planning Officer in the Planning Policy and Enabling Team.
Thanks. James Hill.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Dave Ashmore.
You've already done that.
Oh, you've just loitered down to the bottom. My apology. And Anna Martin, who is here.
Present. Anna Martin, present.
Great, from Democratic Services. Is there anybody else who I haven't called, who I can't see?
David Williams, Chief Executive, and I apologise for the delayed start to the meeting.
All right. If you'd of course been on Zoom, David, I'd have been able to see everybody easily. But we operate with substandard equipment. Such is life. So let's quickly run through the agenda. Any apologies for absence? I know Steve Pitt is not with us as he has been in hospital, and Lee Hunt, I think, is not going to be able to join us either. Any declarations of interest, colleagues?
Yes.
Hugh Mason.
I'm advised by the City Solicitor that whereas in 2014 I did not have a prejudicial interest to declare in the matters which are being considered under item 4, following the change in ownership and structure of HCB Limited in 2016, my position as the Director of Hampshire Credit Union now constitutes a prejudicial interest, and therefore I should take no part in debate or vote on this item. I intend therefore to leave the meeting at that time and would request Anna Martin to ring me on my mobile or my landline when I can come back in.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I see a hand from Chris Ward.
Yes, there's an item on the agenda, item 4 on the Hampshire Community Bank, and I am a Director of Hampshire Community Bank Holding Limited. I will not partake in the discussion related to Hampshire Community Bank.
Okay, any other declarations of interest, colleague? Nope. Okay. Record of previous meetings. The minutes, let me get to them. I've got one thing just to bring up in terms of the Harry Sotnick house and the place for people to be able to move over to when they are recovering or being assessed for recovery, coming out of hospital. I've just feedback from one homeowner to say how incredibly helpful that was, that somebody coming out of hospital who had COVID symptoms could go to this special isolated floor at Harry Sotnick and not go into a nursing home, because that meant they didn't have to lock down the whole nursing home for everybody else for 2 weeks. And he was incredibly grateful to the work that the City Council had done, and really appreciative of the thought of trying to make sure that we'd learned the lessons from the first wave in terms of what had happened in care homes. So my thanks, Matthew, to you and all the team at Adult Social Care. I think that's been a very, very positive move. Any other items on the minutes? Matthew. Councillor Matthew Winnington.
Thank you, Gerald, and thank you for your kind words about Harry Sotnick House. The team there and Adult Social Care in general do an absolutely fantastic job, and the work they're doing at Harry Sotnick is a real benefit to the city, and they're a very professional, hard-working team there. So I'd like to give my thanks to them as well for all their work they're doing. My particular thing was to, under item 42, minute 42 of the minutes from the last meeting, and it was just regarding, which was our COVID update from the Chief Executive, and it's just to attach the particular issues we're having at the moment to do with testing. Testing, as we know in the city, we're in a very unusual position. We're actually in a very fortunate position of having both the regional drive-in facility, but also the first facility at a university in the country, which is also open to local people as well. And despite that, the situation with people in the city being able to get tests is worsening by the day. And this isn't just to get appointments at these testing centres, but it's also to be able to get home testing. Just today, I've had correspondence from someone who is a family of 5, and they've been trying since Friday to try and get testing, both either to do a walk-in, to a drive-in, or home care testing, and they cannot get anything even remotely local at all, which is completely impractical. That's meaning their children are not being able to go to school, the parents are not being able to go to work, and this is having a real impact on their lives. This is all down to the fact that government testing lab capacity is utterly insufficient. It should not be an issue, it should not be a problem, and it is an absolute disgrace that the lives and of people in Portsmouth and outside, of course, are being affected by the fact that the government has not been able to come up with a plan about this, even though this was foreseen for months and months ago that this would become an issue. Because if you carry on saying that more people should get tested, which is absolutely right, you have to back it up with lab capacity. So it's a real concern. We are working as hard as we possibly can to make sure that everyone is getting tested in the city as much as possible, to make sure that the most vulnerable people are getting tested as much as possible. But unfortunately, outside of care homes who have whole care home testing, the most vulnerable people cannot be prioritised because the system doesn't let that happen. And that is a real problem for us. So the work in the city is fantastic about COVID, but we are being let down by national incompetence in not having the right amount of lab capacity, so we can make the most of the fact that we've got such good testing capacity in the city, and that is a real shame and a real disgrace, really. So we are fighting. I'd like to give the message to everyone out there in the city. We are fighting to get the government to get their act together and get that lab capacity to where it needs to be, so that everyone in the city who needs to be tested, so they can know if they've got the virus or not, so they can self-isolate, but so they can make sure they're not spreading anything, that they can get back to school, get back to work, and we are fighting for you to make sure that that happens, and we're calling on the government to get it sat together. You're on mute, Gerald.
Sorry, trying to be good and mute myself. Susie Horton, you've also raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Gerald. I just want to echo what Matt's saying. I'm not going to repeat all the detail of it, but just to say from my perspective with schools, this is so disappointing. For the last 6 months, a lot of kids haven't been to school. We've worked really hard with the Director of Public Health. We've set up infection control groups. Schools have really gone way beyond the call of duty to do absolutely everything. We've done a whole campaign over the summer about managing fear and expectations of parents. We've got kids wanting to come back to school. We've got brilliant attendance, and then within a few days we're hearing of people not being able to go into school because I don't know if anyone here has ever been in a school, but there are colds and coughs galore, and this is the cold season. It started. People they're being really sensible. They're taking this civic responsibility really seriously, which is what we want. And they're just not being able to get hold of tests. And it's, I've heard of, Councillor Winnington has just highlighted one case, but I've been contacted by quite a few people today who quite rightly want their kids back in school. So just want to really support what Matthew is saying.
So Councillor Horton, my understanding is that the problem is that teaching staff are going off because they think they're symptomatic. They're trying to get a test. Mm-hmm. They can't get a test, so they can't go back to school to go to work. And because of that, whole classes are being sent home at a point where kids need to be in school. Am I right with that?
Well, this is the principle of the bubble system. So I'm not suggesting that every teacher who needs a test, that means the whole class has gone home yet. But it will happen. That could be a feasible situation, because if the teachers within that bubble have been, as it were, used up, if we want to look at it from a numerical point of view, then we might find ourselves in those situations. And I'm hearing about teachers being sent to Oxford to get a test, and we need them back. We need them back in the classrooms. Otherwise, this is going to be further disruption. So some of these young people in our city haven't been in school for 6 months, and now they're not being in school, or potentially they're not being in school because they not because they're ill, but because someone else can't get a test.
Okay. Can I suggest that we do a letter both from yourself, Councillor Horton, and also Councillor Winnington, as the two cabinet members with most responsibility, to the government today to urge them to get this sorted, and because it's fundamental. If we can't get people tested, it's going to mean really significant problems both in education and in social care. Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Is that all right with both of you? Okay, fine, thank you. All right, if we, colleagues, apart from that, are we happy with the minutes of the previous meeting? Thank you very much indeed.
Chairman, Councillor Lee Hunt has joined the meeting.
Oh, Lee, welcome. Hello, Lee, welcome. Any interest to declare, Lee? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you as always. Let's now move on to item 4, the Hampshire Community Bank, and can we say goodbye to Councillor Hugh Mason and to Chris Ward at this point, as they both have interests that need to exclude them. So, Mr. Pike, Julian, would you like to introduce this report, please?
Yes, thank you, Leader. I would like to draw members' attention in particular to section 3, which sets out the background to this report. As amongst other things, it explains the bank's primary objective and philosophy, that being to grow the local economy and thus protect and stimulate job creation, which complements well the council's priority to encourage businesses to invest in the city and to be in the support of sustainable growth. The bank's commitment is also genuine to that of one of a community bank run by local professionals for local people, and also for small firms, whilst retaining wealth and prosperity in the local area. Paragraph 3.5 sets out some of the benefits of community banks in a bullet point form. The report goes on to provide considerable background information, and members have reviewed this in some detail. But in summary, the report emphasises that the 10 million Treasury Management Lending Facility being sought from the Council is low risk in nature, because loans made by Hampshire Community Bank will only be to the strongest SMEs with the highest credit quality, and as a consequence, most likely to promote growth in the Portsmouth and Hampshire areas. It also emphasises that the lending facility will have the benefit of supporting the bank through the final stages of the banking regulator's authorisation process, which will protect the council's £5 million equity investment provided in 2014, and should also lead to an increase in the net worth of the bank following the granting of a full banking licence by the regulator. The report explains the corporate structure and the rationale behind it, which is designed to mitigate the risk of HCB holding being taken over, thus ensuring longevity of ownership, benefit to local residents. And it also explains that the Grants Board Grants Board governance arrangements are and investor voting rights on the Grants Board. And it also includes biographies of the trustees and the directors. The report is seeking Cabinet approval of the recommendations as set out in paragraph 2.
Okay, thank you very much, Julian. Can I ask Mr. Williams, I'm sorry, I didn't read the beginning script. Do you want me to read the beginning script to make sure that people know that we're doing this under Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020?
I think you've done that. Thank you, Chairman.
Lovely. Okay. Mr. Pike, thank you very much. I understand we've got a written deputation from Mr. Jerry Brown, which you are about to read, and then I think you may have some comments to answer some of the questions that he's raised.
Yes, that is correct, Leader. The following is a deputation on behalf of Mr. Jerry Brown regarding agenda item 4 for Hampshire Community Bank. HCB was set up in 2014 with the majority of the financial commitment being taken on by PCC. We committed £5 million, and that so far £3.7 million has been spent during the start-up phase. The plan that PCC was sold said that HCB would get a banking licence in 2 years. We are 6 years on and still no licence, and the most recent report said that we would have a licence in Q3 2020, but it has still not come to pass. There are 8 working days left. Now HCB is asking PCC to lend HCB £10 million in 2 tranches so it can lend money to SMEs. That loan would be low risk, we are told, because the SMEs chosen to benefit from the loans would all be very low risk businesses. Yet the CIC Werner is invested in had the same objectives and went bust. And now we are living in unprecedented times where previously rock-solid businesses are now going to the wall. And when they do fail, it will be PCC picking up the tab. We are relying on the analysis of some accountants, BDO, and promises about the viability and success of the future portfolio. We were told the same about Vessel and about our property investment portfolio. There is a pattern here. We have also been told there will be little or no benefit to PCC from HCB before 2025 at the earliest, 5 years from the banking licence. When we made the initial investment, Startup Capital, we were told that the government department, DBIS, Business Innovation and Skills, would invest up to £7 million. Subsequent to the 2015 election, that got cancelled. So virtually all of the money is coming from PCC to support an enterprise that is Hampshire focused. Effective control of the group of companies at 3 levels lies in the most in the hands of one person, Professor Werner. We were told that in 2018 we would make £249,000. We made nothing nor anything since. Excuse me. In the most recent documents, today's agenda papers, we are told that Prof. Werner is a professor at Southampton University. This is not the case, as he left the post in 2018 after being awarded £2.5 million at an employment tribunal and is now employed at De Montfort University. Why are there no investments from Hampshire County Council or Southampton City Council? Surely if HCB is Hampshire-wide, it will benefit taxpayers in their area more than it does ours, yet we are taking the vast majority of the risk. We have provided 90% of the capital, yet we have 1/19 of the vote. We still have no banking licence 4 years on from when it was promised. No benefits have accrued for PCC. We have spent about 4 million so far on premises, on staff, and on the long and drawn out process of applying for a licence. Professor Werner has effective control of the enterprise, yet has never been asked to answer questions at PCC. Prof Werner's friends and colleagues were appointed as directors of the bank. We don't know how much we are paying for the staff at the NN established bank, but we do know that there are no British people in the leadership team of the bank. All of the original directors, except Prof Werner, have left. Reporting is minimal, though legal, and effective control continues to remain in the hands of one person. All of the transactions HCB is lending out money we have provided have been done via Eastleigh Borough Council. The whole situation begs some questions. What has our 3.75 million been spent on so far? How come the Deputy Section 151 officer is asking PCC for 10 million for a company of which his boss is a director? What is the ongoing monthly run rate of spend? Where is the project plan showing how we get to a banking licence? The process and timetable on page 5 simply won't do. Why aren't Southampton and Hampshire and Winchester also financing this, as they too will benefit? How come Local First Community Interest Company, of which Mr Werner is also a director, owns the second largest number of shares in HCB Holding Limited, yet has very little capital invested? Is it true that PCC have only 19% of the voting rights, yet put more than 90% of the capital and take 90% of the risk? Where is the planned organisation chart with salary bands and start dates? If the proposed SMEs represent such a low risk, how will HCB win their business over more established banks? What is the differentiator? Why did Eastleigh Borough Council get to transfer its failed loan company, Local First CIC, to HCB, given that Prof Werner was on the board of Local First and HCB at the same time, giving additional debt to HCB? HCB is beginning to look and smell and feel like a more mature version of Vessel, an investment that might in the future make a return, but carries 5 years of risk and investment from PCC before that can happen. There are no independent directors. There is no published plan. We need independent directors on HCB who are not nominated or known to any current directors. A plan showing the events and timetable and dependencies that gets HCB to a full licence and a breakdown of the costs involved. A full organisation chart showing roles currently empty or filled and salary bands. The financial plan, including the planned expenditures to 2025, to carefully consider whether or not we think this is a worthwhile investment of our taxpayer money, or whether it is yet another Vessel oversold and under-delivered. That's the end of the deputation, Leader.
Thank you very much, Julian. There are quite a large numbers of questions in there. Julian, have you got any answers for any of those?
Yes, I can. A couple of points of clarification, and I also will attempt to answer some of the questions, or all the questions that have been raised. With regards to the statement in the report where we're saying that Professor Werner is employed by Southampton University, the references in the body of the report on pages 4, 5 and 6 are correct. But unfortunately, pages 31 and 32 of Appendix 2 still state Mr. Werner is a professor of international banking at the University of Southampton, which is out of date. However, the biography of Mr. Werner, which is also included at Appendix 3 on page 35, is correct, where it states that he is currently Director, Centre for Research on Accountability, Governance and Sustainability at De Montfort University, Leicester. With regards to Mr. Werner's employment tribunal claim, in June 2019, Professor Werner was awarded 2.5 million at an employment tribunal on the grounds that he was harassed and discriminated against by his employer. At the time, Southampton University did not contest the case. In July 2019, Southampton University appealed and a second tribunal set aside the original decision to allow more time for Southampton University to prepare their response, with a future hearing to be set at a later date to be decided. To date, there has been no further tribunal hearing. With regards to the specific questions raised by Mr. Brown, how the 3.75 million has been spent so far, based on the published accounts as at the 30th of April 2019, of the 5.9 million share capital, of which PCC has paid 3.75 million of that figure, 1.7 million was held as fixed assets, primarily in property. 2.4 million is held in net current assets, primarily as cash and loans and advances to customers. And 1.8 million had been charged to the P&L account to meet operating costs, which would include the cost of applying for a banking license. With regards to why I, as Deputy Section 151 officer, is asking for the £10 million for Hampshire Community Bank, sorry, excuse me. The 10 million loan facility sought is in accordance with the Treasury Management Policy approved by Cabinet and City Council in March 2020. Operational Treasury Management activity in accordance with the approved policy is carried out by the Deputy Director of Finance, i.e. myself, and the Finance Manager of Technical and Financial Planning. Whilst the Section 151 officer does have a primary responsibility to this council and the council taxpayer under statute, to avoid any perception of conflict, the report is provided by the Deputy Section 151 officer, i.e. myself. As Deputy Section 151 officer, in this capacity, I have a similar statutory responsibility to the council and to the taxpayer, but the Section 151 officer is in attendance should we need to refer to him as to why I'm dealing with this as opposed to himself. With regards to what the monthly run rate of spend is, the total net cost in 2019-20 was £784,000 for the full year. From May 2020 of this year, the expected run rate is £55,000 per month for the remainder of this year to December 2020. And that run rate includes core team salaries of circa 42,000, which have been provided by their financial plan, operating overheads and external advice. The project plan regarding how the future project plan regarding how the Hampshire Community Bank will obtain their banking license, the authorization process for that stage of the project is now highly simplified, as all the complex processes going before it for authorization have been completed, and most of all the challenge session has been completed. And thus the application journey for authorization with restrictions has been completed. And what remains now is the implementation of the list of requested alterations to Hampshire Community Bank's application by the regulator, which was expected to happen in September to the end of November 2020. The submission of the final application and documentation to the regulator expected in early December 2020. And then award with restrictions after completing of the challenge session should be well within 6 months after submission of the application documents, and hence by 2021 by the latest, with full authorization being expected 12 months after obtaining authorization with restrictions. HCB's liquidity budget projections forecasts that it will operate as a fully licensed bank, assumes that the bank will operate as a fully licensed bank in Q3 of 2021. With regards to why Southampton and Hampshire and Winchester aren't financing this, as they may well benefit from the local bank, that's really a question for those local authorities. Presumably they have other priorities. I do know that Southampton City Council had previously had approval to invest. However, there have been changes in political control and changes in senior staff, and as a consequence, the relationships built have been lost. Winchester City Council is actually an investor. how come Local First Community Interest Company is the owns the second largest number of shares? Well, that's because Local First were provided with 950 shares in Hampshire Community Bank Holding in return for them passing the loan book that they had, which was worth over 1.1 million to Hampshire Community Bank. This was known as the Green Growth Loan Scheme. And this is also will also be used to act as security against the Treasury Management loan facility that we are seeking here. He asked the question, is it true that PCC have only 19% of the voting rights, yet put more than 90% of the capital and take 90% of the risk? No, those figures aren't quite right. Voting rights in Hampshire Community Bank Holdings are, like PCC, are 5.5%. Which is made up of the 9 shareholders with 1 vote each, and Hampshire Community Bank retaining the remaining 50%. So in total, LA investors hold 44% of Hampshire Community Bank shares and therefore votes. Capital investment of 5 million in shares represents 62.5% of the 8 million in share capital. And PCC would have 38.5% of the votes available on the grants board. With regard to the organisation chart and the salary bands, the City Council has received an organisation chart detailing filled and unfilled posts, along with salary bands, and the monthly cost of those filled posts is consistent with the monthly run rate that I referred to earlier. With regard to his question that if SMEs are such a low risk, how will HCB win their business over more established banks? What's the differentiator? Well, HCB has already identified that there is demand that they are unable to satisfy from their existing customers. The regulator needs to be satisfied that HCB has a viable regulatory business plan which addresses product range, offering and market. The SME market is underserved by the big banks, as illustrated in graph 1A on page 12. Main differentiators is that the 70,000 SME markets in the Hampshire area are underserved. It's a local bank. It will offer a more personal service and a quicker turnaround time on applications and decisions compared to the normal high street retail banks. It will be able to offer competitively priced products, and it will also be able to redistribute its profits to good causes in the local area, which will be a factor in some people's considerations on who they choose to bank with.
Julian, can I ask you to move on? Time is moving on.
Yeah, yes, okay. I think the only thing I would add then is to pick up on his point about independent directors, and what I would say is that the directors that are appointed to the board have been vetted and interviewed by the regulators, and the regulators do require independent directors on the board. Directors have their own legal responsibilities when they're on the board, and Johannes Bass, director of DZ Bank AG London, is the senior independent director and sits on HCB Holding alongside Chris Ward from PCC and Richard Werner. And Johannes Haas is also a director on HC Bank. So there is more than one director involved with each of these companies. That would conclude my response, Leader.
Thank you very much. And I think it'd be helpful, Julian, if you could send a copy of that in writing to Mr. Brown so he can go through that in detail to see if that reassures him on any of the things.
Yeah.
Okay, colleagues, I have Councillor Darren Sanders who's indicated to speak.
Thank you, Leader. Just a couple of questions following up from Mr. Pike's responses. I just want some points of clarification, really. So there is nothing to stop us requesting further independent directors with no links to any of the current companies or any of the current directors as we go forwards, particularly after the license has been put forwards. I know it's got to be agreed by everybody with a controlling interest, but there's nothing to stop us doing that, is there?
As a shareholder, yes, we could.
That's fine. That's fine. We need to be as open and transparent as possible. And I think that's a lesson we learned from Victory Energy. So that might be something I think we should actively consider. The second bit is around another thing that Mr. Brown was talking about, which is a plan, which seems to have some sort of 5-year plan to take us through to 2025. and possibly some form of formal reporting schedules. There's nothing to prevent us asking the bank to do that, is there?
No, again, as shareholders, we can request that, and but I would say we have already received a summarised 5-year plan from Hampshire Community Bank. So the City Council already is in possession of a summarised plan for the next 5 years. But as shareholders, if we were, there's no reason why we couldn't request further information.
I think in the interest of openness and transparency, particularly as it's such a large investment, I mean, personally, I think the advantage for SMEs is significant, particularly in the COVID climate. But I think we need to be as open and as transparent as possible. Again, learning from the Victory Energy situation that Mr. Brown raised. I think openness and transparency is fine. So I'd suggest we put those two forwards. But aside from that, I'm content to go through.
And Councillor Sanders, I was wondering whether we should put an extra recommendation to say that there should be a 6-monthly report to a public meeting from the bank about this, because there's a lot of council money being invested here. And again, learning from Victory Energy, I'm uneasy about it coming to Cabinet, because Cabinet is just one party, and I think it's best if we try to have a report to a cross-party committee. And I wondered if the Governance Audit and Scrutiny Committee was, Standards Committee, sorry, GAS, was the right place to send it, because they have an overview and an audit role that might be helpful to give a cross-party view on this.
I personally would agree, but others may not.
Okay. Darren, could you put your hand down electronically? Hurrah. No, not quite there yet. Mr. Pike, you're the only other person indicating. Julian, is there something you'd like to add?
Well, the only caveat I was going to add to that is as a shareholder, it's something we could request that this information comes forward, but as an independent company, we wouldn't necessarily be able to insist upon it, although we would be in a position of strength if we were still going to make future advances under our treasury management.
And we might have words with any of the directors who we happen to see if that request was turned down. Okay. Colleagues, at that point, colleagues, are you happy to accept this recommendations with the additional one about 6-monthly reporting to governance and audit? Yep. No dissent? No. Okay, that's accepted. Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to the Seafront Master Plan, which Councillor Steve Pitt would have been here to present as Cabinet member. No, big way he would have been involved in doing it. So, but this is Ian Maguire and Hugh Mason. Can somebody phone Hugh to see if we can get him back into the meeting, as he's now allowed back in? And Mr. Maguire, do you want to present the report?
Thank you, sir. So the report is in my name as the Assistant Director for Planning and Economic Growth, but the lead officer, Stephen Ho, has certainly done the lion's share of the work for it, and I'll pass over to him to give the full report, if I may.
Of course. Stephen, welcome. Let us know what we need to know.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, like Ian mentioned, this report in his name as Assistant Director of Planning and Economic Growth, and brought under the Cabinet Member for Planning Policy and City Development. The main purposes of the report is twofold: to report on the results of the public consultation that was held in February and March of 2019, and to also advise members on the content of the draft Seafront Master Plan and to seek approval to consult on this draft version. So to give some background to the Seafront Master Plan itself, which is also outlined in section 3 of the Cabinet report. This is a refresh of the current adopted Seafront Master Plan supplementary planning document, which was previously adopted in 2013. It is a draft version which has been in development over the past couple of years, starting off with a period of public consultation in summer 2018 and again in February, March 2019. And this particular round of public consultation is reported on in section 4 and also in appendix 1 of the report. These rounds of consultation have been punctuated with various workshops with members of the public and various interest groups in collaboration with the Eastern Solent Coastal Partnership on their work with the Solent Coastal Scheme, which has now begun its construction phase. There have been various workshops and meetings with other services within the council, meetings with statutory consultees, interest groups and landowners and stakeholders. And this draft has been developed in consultation with feedback from various members along the way. Officers have also been informed and guided by various national and local policies and strategies, and the draft has had due regard to these wherever appropriate and necessary. As a supplementary planning document, this document itself is a planning tool to support policy PCS 9 of the adopted Portsmouth local plan, to elaborate on the policy itself and to provide more planning guidance where it can as a strategic level planning document, and providing the planning and spatial framework for the seafront. When adopted, it will be a material consideration in decision making for the seafront area. As for the draft itself, that is the subject of this report and is found in Appendix 2. The document sets out a vision for the seafront area, provides strategic and detailed planning guidance, identifies further enhancement and development opportunities, and highlights elements of the seafront that should be conserved. The guidance is presented either under different theme areas, such as climate change, health and well-being, public realm, and transport and access, among others, and also presents guidance for the seafront in the geographical sense on an area-by-area basis, and recommends or suggests various approaches that could occur in these areas relating to, for example, development opportunities or placemaking or movements by various methods of travel. When producing guidance on the development of such an important place as the seafront, there will inevitably be difficult challenges as members need to make decisions with the often competing interests of those that live, work and recreate in the area. Some of the opportunities and options are likely to be more contentious than others. For example, the draft makes recommendation on what could happen in the north sector of Avenue Khan in order to promote better walking and cycling infrastructure, or also how the area around the D-Day Stone at St. Helens Parade could work to improve better accessibility and movement, which could be achieved through various examples suggested in the document. We know that these matters were of particular interest to different groups in previous consultations. So this consultation will give a further opportunity to explore people's opinions of the options recommended in this draft. As a strategic level planning document, it is envisaged that the recommendations and suggestions contained in this seafront master plan could be looked at in greater scope and detail and ultimately delivered through, for example, third-party developers or other stakeholders coming forward and engaging in the planning application process with their detailed proposals, or various project-level initiatives or schemes that could be led by the council itself or otherwise, which could also look at in greater scope and detail the guidance and approaches recommended in the seafront master plan. So one such example of this project-level look is the collaborative enhancement plan that has been produced by the Eastern Solar Coastal Partnership through the South Sea Coastal Scheme. And this can be found in Appendix 7 of the report. The collaborative enhancement plan demonstrates through a series of projects and ideas how the ambition of the seafront master plan could be realised through one particular scenario. And so this collaborative enhancement plan will also be subject to consultation and is to be hosted and included as part of the consultation on the seafront master plan. It's very much worth highlighting that this version of the seafront master plan is for consultation. And whilst this is a consultation dictated and governed by statute and regulation, officers will be looking to receive and consider opinions and views as much as you can from the public, and in as many ways in which the current COVID-19 situation allows us to, some of which is outlined in Section 6 of the report. So notwithstanding this, we are also continuing to explore as many options as possible for the consultation in order to realise as much value that public consultation is able to give us in terms of the future work in finalising the draft seafront master plan. So the outcome of this consultation will be reported back to members in due course, along with any officer recommendations for the final version in the view of seeking full adoption. And so with that, I'll hand back to you, Chairman. And if members have any questions, then myself or Ian will be happy to address. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Hugh Mason, as portfolio holder, would you like to go first?
It's not quite as questions, it's commentary.
Well, no, what either questions, comments, thoughts, other peregrinations, whatever you like.
Oh, I shall ramble on for a few minutes then. First of all, Chairman, this is the right time because we are working on the sea defences. This will make major changes to our seafront, and it is right that we should now be considering what we want our planning on the seafront to look like, what we envisage for the future of our seafront. So this is the right time to do it. And we need to take this draft plan in conjunction with what we see in Appendix 7 about the sea defence developments. The second thing which is important is to stress that this is a consultation. It is not written in stone. It is not something which we are going to go ahead with willy-nilly, whatever people say. We have consulted before. We've got the you've got in the papers before you the results of our initial consultation, and this has thrown up questions on which we need to consult further. The most important ones, it would seem to me, around the D-Day stone, which is a very, very important piece of our heritage. And the second one is a very interesting one, which is that there's a general agreement that we want non-essential roads closed. And the question of whether Avenue de Caen is a non-essential road or whether it is an important way leading to the D-Day experience. So there are a number of issues which are going to be very important to take out to the people, and it is important that people do take part in this consultation, because only when people really take part will we get a seafront which everybody in this city can be proud.
Thank you very much indeed. Matthew Willington.
Thank you. Speaking primarily as a seafront councillor here, I'd like to thank the officers for all the work that's been going on to bring this to consultation. I think the most important thing is this is a consultation process, and this is not a set in stone at this stage. And I think it's really important that people understand that we've had that initial work that's gone on right at the start of the process of putting together this report, which is based on consultation, and then this is that final draft, which is out for consultation. So I mean, there's still the opportunity that if there's improvements that people think there needs to be. Obviously, it's dynamic at the moment, as both Stephen and Hugh have alluded to in terms of the sea defences. So there's things in there that might well be incorporated in. I have to say I've been fortunate enough to be in a couple of events on the sea defences, one to do with public realm, but the other to do with disabled access, etc., with the sea defences. And I think it's really important that we make sure that interaction that we're having through the sea defences plan, in terms of with various groups, whether they be walking and cycling groups, whether they be disabled groups, whether they be more public realm groups, etc., that we have that opportunity to feed into this master plan as an ongoing thing. And they're engaged in this as well, because obviously this is far wider than just the sea defences, and goes all the way from Old Portsmouth all the way down to Eastney. So, but within that, the consultation responses are really good. It's really clear to understand what people have been doing, and the reaction to that consultation. I do think the whole public realm thing about this is the most important thing, and this is the second seafront master plan I've been through since I've been a councillor, and I know what a good plan can look like. And I know how this can give us a really good way forward. So I encourage everyone to get involved with the consultation on this. I approve of the report going forward, and we've got real opportunities with our seafronts to put a real marker on being a destination that it is, and it works for local people for the next 50 years.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I haven't got anybody else who's indicated they want to speak. So, colleagues, are you happy for this Seafront master plan to go forward. Anybody opposed? No. Okay, that goes through. The next section, ladies and gentlemen, is exclusion of the press and public. This is about one particular issue within the next report, which is to say that, and I hope we can have the whole of this discussion in open session.
Peter Wolf
is now exiting.
All right, Peter, you came and went. So that, colleagues, if you can not refer to the confidential papers that that we're about to talk about, we're about to do the exclusion of the press and public about, then we can hold the rest of this meeting in a public open session, which is, I'm sure, what we all want. So, colleagues, are you happy with the exclusion of the press and public in relation to the paperwork? But we will not refer to it, and we'll in the debate, and therefore keep the meeting in open session. Is that okay? Thank you very much indeed. In which case, let's move on to the Leamington and Horatia House. Ms. James Hill, would you like to introduce this report?
Yes, thank you, Leader. So I'm going to just briefly introduce the report and then hand over to Chris Ward to summarise the financial comments. And we do have other officers involved in the project on the line to help answer any questions should they arise. I also, Leader, have 2 written submissions to read out to you as and when that's appropriate. So the purpose of the report, Cabinet, is to provide an update against the key strands of work and progress since October 2019, when you last received a report. Cabinet are asked to note that whilst the report primarily focuses on the demolition of the 2 towers, proceeding on the basis of an initial assessment of a viable development on the 2 footprints of the towers alone, there does remain a strong commitment to explore the wider area improvements with the community and incorporate into the design brief all of the feedback from the consultation undertaken last year, and particularly the 7 key themes that emerged. On the basis of the initial viability assessment, the report provides Cabinet with an option to proceed with the demolition via deconstruction method, initially funded via the major repairs reserve of the housing revenue account, with then a decision for full council to agree the full scheme development budget. So the report splits the recommendations accordingly for Cabinet to decide the demolition and then the whole scheme to development to go to full council for decision. Just a few key points from the report to highlight. Section 4. So there is a confidential report containing commercially sensitive information. However, the key details from that report have been extracted and are used in the body of the report before you. And the appraisal and soft market testing has informed the budget range to demolish the blocks, the method which would be to deconstruct the blocks, and also the timescales. And the procurement process has reached a point where we can go out to tender and appoint a contractor, but that process has been paused whilst the budget to proceed is agreed. And assuming Cabinet agree this report, then the tender will proceed as per the timescales shown in section 4.7. So in practical terms, the deconstruction itself will begin on site in spring 2021. And we would also look to involve the Housing Services Resident Consortium, members from that consortium, in the tender and selection of, for example, a demolition contractor. In section 4.10, there's confirmation that the design team have been appointed, and that was as per the permissions laid out in the October 2019 Cabinet report. So Kara Kusevec, Carson Architects, will be the lead consultant, and there's hopefully a helpful synopsis in the report which provides detail on the design team and highlights some of the case studies to illustrate how they've worked with communities on other projects. And it will be this team that will develop the master plan for the redevelopment of the 2 tower sites, with the community and stakeholders fully consulted and engaged, and also progress the conversation with the community on wider area improvements. There's a section drawing attention to redevelopment, section 5, and again that talks about the design team appointment, but anchors the design brief back to that community engagement that was undertaken last year, and that will be the backbone of the parameters for the development. So it's important to understand that the master planning work will happen in parallel to the blocks actually being demolished or deconstructed, and that will provide an opportunity to build upon the successful engagement and consultation work that was undertaken last year and use the best practice methods available to engage and consult with the community and stakeholders. And our initial meeting with the design team has provided them with all of the background information, the reports to date, the feedback from the 2019 engagement, a list of all of the stakeholders identified, and you should expect for an engagement and consultation strategy to be formulated and available towards the end of this month. There's an update in the report on the progress with regard to the telecoms work, so in section 4.19, and both telecom operators are working with us to relocate the aerial systems. And members will be aware that we have been made aware of peregrine falcons potentially nesting on Horatia House, and there's a specific section drawing attention to that. Those birds are Schedule 1 protected birds, which provides protection from, for example, disturbance during the nesting periods. And I think it's important that in 5.11 there's a clear commitment to ensure that PCC abides by the protection and will commission experts to work with us. And just by way of an update, since the report was written, we have a meeting with representatives from Hampshire Ornithological Society, next week to progress that discussion. I'll hand over to Chris, if I may, just to summarise the finances in the report.
Thanks, James and Leader. If I deal with the deconstruction first, which is the concern of the cabinet decision, and I'll deal with the wider development scheme later, which is reserved for a council decision, obviously in October. I think contextually that we've set this in the overall context that there's a good expectation that there is a viable whole development. And so the deconstruction itself is set in that context. It does require, it will be a cost of up to £10 million with other associated costs as well, which at this stage would require a redirection of funding from the Housing Capital Programme away from repairs to the council's housing stock and obviously towards the deconstruction of the two blocks. It is anticipated that in the event that council do approve the wider scheme, which I'll talk to shortly, that funding can be replaced so that there is no detriment to the maintenance programme for the housing stock more generally. In terms of the development, the wider development scheme itself, as I said, this is reserved for a council decision, and it involves a scheme that is currently obviously at its very early stages. You've heard from James about the level of detail that we're at the moment and the consultation and costing exercise that's been done to date. But we have undertaken a financial appraisal across a number of scenarios given the early stages and the degree of uncertainty at this stage. Those financial evaluations obviously seek to replace the lost 272 social units, but also include a further 168 units that would be provided at market rent. Whilst I talk about a range of scenarios, our base case at this stage assumes that over a 60-year period, which is obviously a lengthy period of time, that the excess of rent over all costs will amount to around £21 million in today's money. We've obviously run a number of scenarios because of the early stage, as I mentioned. We've looked at what the impact of cost increases might be. We've also looked at the impact of potential reduction from Homes England funding. And we still believe across a range of scenarios, there is reasonable expectation that there's a viable scheme. Quoted in the report is a range of financial outcomes between 7 million and 21 million in today's terms as a surplus. And the recommendations themselves that are before you, or sorry, the recommendations that you would be seeking to pass on to council for their consideration, look to provide a degree of comfort for the council in the sense that because of the degree of uncertainty that we're at the moment, it will ask council to approve a scheme currently valued at £120 million, but approve a scheme in principle that could rise up to £145 million. However, that is still predicated on the overall proposition that the development scheme itself is viable and therefore not at detriment to the overall housing revenue account business plan over the next 30 and indeed the next 60 years. That £145 million limit is also effectively a proxy for significant change. So the parameters that are set out within the recommendations are seeking to provide a degree of protection for council in the sense that if there is significant change, then it would require a further decision by the council. But in all respects, there is no compromise on the development being viable in its totality. So happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I think the next thing then to do is to ask for Councillor Cal Corkery's deputation, which I think Julian has to be able. No, James has to read out.
Yes, and there's one from Maria Cole as well.
Excellent. Okay, fine.
I'll start with the written submission from Councillor Cal Corkery. It reads that I would like to submit the written deputation to be read out at Cabinet meeting in support of agenda item 7 as I'm unable to attend. The loss of 272 units of social rented housing in the city has had a significant impact on the ability of local people to access genuinely affordable and secure accommodation. Replacement of these lost council homes should be an absolute priority, and I welcome the report being considered today, which seeks to take forward the redevelopment of the area. While the initial viability works indicate that the 272 council homes can be re-provided on site if cross-subsidised by 168 units for market sale, it must be the case that this is a bare minimum starting point, and that as the project develops, if the opportunity to increase the ratio of council housing on site arises, then it should be taken. Similarly, while the current initial proposals do not contain any replacement home at social rents, the traditional level at which the council rents are set, this is something that must be kept under constant review and changed as and when possible. Given the significance of this redevelopment for the area, it is essential that the local community are actively engaged and involved throughout the process. I am encouraged by the case studies provided in Appendix 2 and particularly interested in the community-led co-design process. I would strongly encourage that approach be considered for this project. In addition, I would like to propose that places on the project board be reserved for elected resident representatives to ensure that the voice of the local community is heard throughout the redevelopment process. I am glad to be able to support the proposed demolition of the 2 tower blocks and excited by the possibilities for significant improvements to this part of Somerstown through redevelopment. I hope the comments and suggestions I've made on tenure mix, genuine affordability and community involvement are a useful contribution to today's meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And then one from Maria Cole.
Yes, so this is a written submission from Maria Cole, who's a member of the Housing Services Resident Consortium. I've been sent paperwork for agenda item number 7, reporting on Leamington and Horatia houses. I have no questions for this item. My only comment would be that the council maintain their commitment to consult with residents of Somerstown. I am pleased that things are moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So let's come to Councillor Darren Sanders first as Cabinet Member for Housing. Darren.
Thank you, Leader. I'm delighted that this report has finally arrived. But for the virus, this report would have arrived a few months ago. It is absolutely essential, in my view, that we take this development forwards, and I'm delighted that we finally come up with a scheme that stacks up financially. The reason for that, and it relates to some of the issues around community engagement that have been raised, is that too often Somerstown is a part of the city whereby lots of plans have happened and very little has been developed. And I know from talking to my friends, the people I grew up with around there, that they're very keen for something to happen. The last thing they want on this site is nothing to happen. And I'm delighted that we've been able to get a scheme that is viable, and that we're able to ask Cabinet and then full council for a funding envelope that will enable us to work with local people to deliver the final scheme. This is the first stage of what will be the biggest single investment in council housing in a generation. And it is absolutely essential, in my view, that we stick to there being no net loss of council housing on the site. We cannot afford that. And that's something that I think is really, really important. But what has to happen is that this is a project that is done with people, not to people. I'm delighted that the 7 things that emerged from the first round of consultation are the 7 principles on which we will take this scheme forwards, and that is excellent news. How we consult with people is an interesting issue. I've sat on many a project board for estate renewal, and they're wonderful, but they do take time. And I think the last thing people in Somerstown are looking for is time. I want this done as quickly as possible. I want it done as safely as possible. And that's why the method of deconstruction, floor by floor, panel by panel, is the safest thing to do. I note the concern about the loss of social housing, but the first role of a landlord is to keep our tenants safe. And that is something that we as an administration did pretty much when we came in, and it remains the right thing to do. So safety is important. But within the funding envelope that we're allowing, hopefully we'll agree today and on the 13th of October, we will be able to do various things. Hopefully we can bring the cost down, not up. Hopefully we can get rents down, not up. That's certainly what I want. And also I want the development to be as green as possible, which nobody has mentioned so far. We have to make sure this development delivers on our climate emergency goals, as well as being safe and affordable for people. I would also, I'm interested in the appendices that came through with the report, and I note that one of the developments that was mentioned has only a minority of houses at affordable rent and social housing. That led to a dispute with the London Mayor. I don't want that to happen. I want this to go through. I'm delighted it's here. I look forward to the backing of Cabinet colleagues today, and I hope we can get the backing of every single councillor for this massive investment to deliver a brighter future for Somerstown on the 13th of October. And if so, lots of people will be a little bit happy. So I'm delighted to support this report, delighted to support the views of Mr. Hill and Mr. Ward, and Leader. Hope we can pass this today.
Okay, colleagues, thanks very much indeed for that, Darren. Colleagues, anybody else wanting to come in on this report? No? Okay, so let's go to the vote. Colleagues, you happy with the recommendations? Okay, nobody saying no, so that goes through. Thank you very much indeed. That's the conclusion of this meeting of the Cabinet of Portsmouth City Council. Thank you very much indeed, and do keep well, do keep safe. Bye-bye.
Yeah. I will just stop the live stream now, Leader.
Lovely.